Tear down that ugly concrete wall by Friday, old man, or I will make sure you lose this house. Bethany Cromwell shouted it from the bottom step of my porch at 7 in the morning, with one hand on her hip and the other holding a cream-colored envelope stamped with the logo of the Pine Ridge Valley Homeowners Association. The mountain was still blue with early light. The aspens behind my garage were shaking silver leaves in the wind. My coffee had not even cooled yet, and there she stood in a white designer tracksuit, sunglasses pushed into her hair, speaking to me as if my home, my land, and the last quiet corner of my life were simply mistakes waiting for her signature to correct. She slapped the envelope against my chest and smiled the kind of smile people wear when they have already imagined you losing. The envelope smelled like expensive paper and bad intentions. I did not open it right away. I looked past Bethany, past her pearl-white SUV idling in my gravel drive, toward the 8-foot concrete wall that ran along the west side of my property. It was not pretty in the way Bethany used that word. It was not decorative. It had no wrought iron curls, no cedar trim, no painted little caps meant to please real estate brochures. It was poured concrete, reinforced with steel, anchored deep into Colorado ground, and finished with the same calm precision I had once used designing bridge supports in mountain passes where one bad calculation could close a highway for a year. To Bethany, it was an eyesore. To me, it was the wall around Sarah's garden. Sarah had been my wife for 38 years. She had died 2 springs before Bethany bought the mansion next door. I still disliked the word died because it sounded too sudden for what had happened. Sarah had faded by inches, by doctor visits, by quiet afternoons on the couch when she pretended to read, and I pretended not to see how tired she was. In her last good year, she planted roses along the slope behind the house, stubborn little bushes she said would survive wind, deer, drought, and my complete lack of gardening instinct. After she was gone, deer came through and stripped the young canes down to sticks. A winter storm knocked down the old wooden fence. I built the concrete wall that summer, not to impress anyone and not to punish anyone, but to hold one place in the world still. Bethany did not know any of that when she moved into the 8,000-square-foot house on the parcel above mine. Or maybe she knew and simply did not care. The house had a circular driveway, a fountain that ran even during dry weeks, and windows so large the place looked less like a home than a showroom for people who wanted other people to know they had arrived. 3 days after moving in, she came over with a basket of store-bought muffins and a voice smooth enough to slide under a locked door. She said she wanted us to be good neighbors. She said Pine Ridge Valley was a special community. She said everyone had a responsibility to protect the mountain view that made our homes valuable. Then her eyes drifted to the concrete wall, and her smile tightened by half an inch. "I am sure you have sentimental reasons," she said, as if sentiment were an old stain that needed to be professionally removed. "But that wall interrupts the sight line from my great room. A low hedge would be so much more appropriate. Maybe glass, something modern, something transparent." I told her the wall was permitted, engineered, and staying exactly where it was. I said it gently. My habit after 40 years of engineering meetings was to keep my voice low when other people raised theirs. Bethany studied me as if she had found the wrong answer in a contract. Then she glanced over my shoulder toward the garden where Sarah's roses were just beginning their second bloom. "Well," she said, "we all have to adapt when the neighborhood changes." The first letter arrived the following Monday. It declared that my concrete wall violated Pine Ridge Valley's community aesthetic standards by creating a visual obstruction, a negative architectural impact, and potential market depreciation for adjacent properties. I remember those words because they were so carefully chosen and so empty. What made me sit down at my kitchen table was not the threat of fines. It was the date typed at the top of the letter. It had been drafted 11 days before Bethany introduced herself with muffins. 11 days before she had supposedly noticed the wall. 11 days before she had officially taken possession of the house next door, according to county records. I folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it in a file. Engineers collect evidence the way gardeners collect seed. You may not need it today, but you keep it dry and labeled because the season can change quickly. I made a note. HOA letter predates owner occupancy. Then I poured a second cup of coffee and watched sunlight slide down the face of the concrete wall. The wall did what it had always done. It stood still. 2 mornings later, orange paint marks appeared at the base of the wall. They were not random. 3 short lines, a circle, and a number written upside down near the drainage channel. I had spent enough years around survey crews and highway contractors to recognize utility markings and boundary notes. Someone had measured the wall, or at least pretended to. I had not authorized any survey. No county notice had arrived. When I called the HOA office, the woman who answered said maintenance might have marked the wrong property by mistake. 5 minutes after I hung up, Bethany texted me from a number I had never given her. She wrote, "Do not overreact. Mistakes happen." That was the first time the situation stopped feeling annoying and started feeling planned. I installed 2 additional cameras that afternoon. Not expensive cameras. Small, dependable ones, placed where a person looking for cameras would not think to look. Sarah used to tease me for labeling every breaker, valve, bolt bin, and extension cord in the house. "Ethan Caldwell," she would say, "you are the only man I know who could organize a junk drawer by torque rating." She would have laughed at the notebook I began keeping for Bethany. Date, time, weather, event, witness, photograph. Simple columns, simple facts. People like Bethany thrive in noise, facts prefer quiet. The next strange thing happened on a Thursday night. The camera facing the west side of the wall lost signal for exactly 11 minutes. Not 10, not 12, 11. At 2:13 a.m., the image froze. At 2:24, it returned. In the morning, I found the soil disturbed near the wall's drainage weep line. The movement was slight, no more than the marks a boot heel might make if someone had crouched and brushed the dirt back into place. There was also a thin crescent scratch on the concrete, near the bottom where someone might test the surface with a tool. I stood there with my coffee cooling in one hand and felt an old part of my mind turn on. The old part was not anger. Anger burns too hot and makes sloppy work. This was calculation. This was the quiet click of a problem becoming structural. Bethany came by that afternoon in a soft pink sweater, carrying a folder and pretending concern. She said several neighbors were worried that the wall might not be safe. She said concrete could crack internally. She said older men sometimes did not realize when a project had become too much to maintain. Her eyes kept moving, not to my face, but to the side table where I kept mail and property tax receipts. She asked when the wall was built. She asked whether the permit was still on file. She asked whether Sarah had been listed on the original deed or whether everything had passed through probate. Each question came wrapped in sympathy. Each one had a hook inside. I gave her nothing but coffee and silence. She did not drink the coffee. By the second week, the neighborhood had begun to shift around me. Pine Ridge Valley was small enough that people waved from trucks and remembered which driveway belonged to which dog. But after Bethany started cispoting in the community Facebook group, the waves grew shorter. Her posts were polished, almost professional. Sunset over the ridge, a caption about shared standards, a photo of snow on pine branches, a quote about protecting property values. Then came the first picture of my wall. It was taken from high above, angled down into my garden. The caption read, "When one homeowner's choices affect everyone's mountain view, silence becomes expensive." I did not own a drone. The HOA rules prohibited drones over private property without written consent. Bethany chaired the HOA Rules Committee because Bethany seemed to chair every committee that gave her a way to tell other people what to do. I saved the post, printed it, and added it to the file. The photo showed Sarah's bench. That was the detail that stayed with me. Not the accusation, not the comments underneath, written by people who had never asked why the wall was there. The bench. Sarah had chosen it from a roadside antique shop because the iron arms were shaped like leaves. At the emergency HOA meeting, Bethany wore navy blue and sat beneath a chandelier that looked too delicate for the weight of her voice. The meeting was in her living room, of course. Pine Ridge Valley had a clubhouse, but Bethany said her home was more convenient for the board. The board consisted of Bethany, a retired accountant named Agnes Whitcomb, and a quiet man named Daniel Price, who owned a landscape supply business down the road. Daniel would not look at me. Agnes looked at Bethany before answering any question. That told me more than the meeting minutes ever would. Bethany opened with a slideshow. She had photographs of my wall from the street, from her upstairs window, from a drone, and from an angle that could only have been taken by someone standing on the slope behind my garage. Red arrows pointed to visual interruption, shadow impact, devaluation zone, and my personal favorite, emotional hostility conveyed by material choice. I almost admired that one. It took a special imagination to accuse concrete of having a bad attitude. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft for the audience, "we respect your history in the neighborhood. We understand this wall has personal meaning, but personal meaning cannot outweigh community harm." I asked who had filed the complaints. Bethany said, residents had requested confidentiality. I asked whether the HOA bylaws allowed anonymous complaints to trigger an emergency enforcement hearing. She said the board had discretion. I asked whether drone photography over private memorial gardens was now considered a community standard. Daniel flinched. Bethany's smile did not move, but her eyes hardened. Then she showed photographs of cracks in the concrete wall. Long, dark cracks running diagonally from top to bottom. The room murmured. Agnes pressed a hand to her mouth. Daniel looked at the carpet. I knew the cracks were not real before I took the printout. Concrete tells stories in patterns. It cracks where stress asks it to crack. These lines were too dramatic, too black, and on the wrong face for the load conditions. They looked like cracks drawn by someone who had seen disaster movies, not structural reports. I could have embarrassed her right then. I could have stood up and explained shrinkage cracks, cold joints, lateral load, drainage, reinforcement spacing, and why the photographs were digital theater. Instead, I asked Bethany to enter the images into the official meeting record. She said she already had. I thanked her and sat back down. The next morning, a private inspection crew arrived at my driveway. 3 men in reflective vests stepped out of a van with no county seal and said they had been contracted to assess safety concerns regarding an unstable wall. I asked by whom. The youngest man looked at his clipboard and said he could not disclose that. I asked for written authorization to enter my property. The older man cleared his throat. Bethany appeared at the edge of her driveway, pretending to check her mail while watching every second. I told the crew they were welcome to return with county paperwork. They left in less than 2 minutes. That same week, my mail began arriving late. A delivery containing replacement irrigation valves for Sarah's garden was marked undeliverable, even though I had been home all day. Someone signed me up for 3 consultation calls with contractors who specialized in concrete demolition. A real estate agent I had never met left a message saying she understood I might be exploring options because the neighborhood situation had become uncomfortable. When I called her back, she apologized and said Bethany Cromwell had mentioned I was considering selling. I was not considering selling, but Bethany was considering it for me. The envelope on my porch came on a windy evening when clouds dragged their shadows across the ridge. It was plain white, sealed with tape, no stamp, no name. Inside was a photocopy of an old survey map. The top corner was missing. The bottom was smudged. Across the blank space, someone had written in block letters, "Do not trust the HOA map." She changed the line. I turned the paper under the kitchen light. The parcel numbers were old. The boundary line near my west wall looked different from the clean digital map Bethany had displayed in her slideshow. Not dramatically different, but enough. A few feet in the mountains can mean a drainage ditch, a driveway, a retaining wall, or the difference between private land and someone else's expensive mistake. I placed the paper in a clear sleeve and wrote, "Anonymous survey fragment, possible boundary alteration." Bethany's bad manners became more creative after that. Her landscapers started work at 6:58 every morning, 2 minutes before the HOA quiet hours ended, with leaf blowers pointed toward my wall. They found reasons to trim hedges along the boundary while I sat in the garden. They aimed work lights across the concrete at night, claiming they were improving security. One Saturday, Bethany hosted a wellness brunch on her patio with a speaker system turned toward my property. Calm instrumental music drifted over the wall for 6 hours, interrupted every 30 minutes by Bethany's voice telling her guests that negative energy often came from people who resisted openness. I did not call the sheriff. I did not yell over the wall. I recorded decibel levels from my porch, photographed light angles, saved video, and continued watering Sarah's roses. A person who wants you to react is disappointed by documentation. Daniel Price came to my door the following Sunday just after sunset. He stood on the porch with his cap in both hands, looking like a man who had walked all the way there while arguing with himself. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, though I had told him for years to call me Ethan, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand I am not proud of it." I invited him inside. He would not sit. He said Bethany had co-signed a business expansion loan for his landscaping supply company during a bad winter. She had helped his wife get a real estate job. She had promised referrals. Then, when he questioned her about the complaints against my wall, she reminded him that loans could be called and referrals could disappear. He had signed one statement saying the wall harmed community value. He had not written the statement. Bethany had handed it to him. Agnes, he said, had her own problem. Bethany knew about a tax lien from years earlier and had helped keep it quiet. "She has something on nearly everyone," Daniel said, "or she makes them think she does." I asked him about the envelope. He looked at the floor. "I did not leave it," he said. Then, after a long pause, "But I know who might have." There was an old surveyor named Glenn Mercer. He did work out here before the valley got built up. Bethany met with him 2 months before she bought the house. He told my wife he would not sign what she wanted him to sign. A week later, he stopped returning calls. The name Glenn Mercer opened a door in my memory. Sarah and I had hired Mercer when we bought our place 15 years earlier, after a spring washout changed the drainage near the slope. He had been careful, slow, and allergic to nonsense. If he had refused to sign something, there was probably a reason. I searched through the old metal filing cabinet in my workshop until midnight and found Mercer's original folder behind warranty papers for a water heater we had replaced in 2014. The folder smelled like dust and machine oil. Inside were survey notes, soil reports, and the original permit drawings for my concrete wall. The wall was not merely a privacy wall. I had almost forgotten the exact wording because at the time it had seemed like bureaucratic language. It was classified as a reinforced boundary and drainage protection structure. The county had required deeper footings because the west slope carried seasonal runoff from the upper parcel. The wall protected my garden, yes, but it also stabilized the lower drainage channel and preserved access to an old utility easement established in 1952. I read that line 3 times. Then I pulled the anonymous photocopy from its sleeve and placed it beside Mercer's map. The clean digital line Bethany used was not the same line. At 66, a man learns to pace himself. I did not spend all night chasing the mystery. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the reflection of the wall in the dark window. But my mind had already moved down the path. A 1952 easement. A wall built to protect drainage and access. A neighbor's driveway and fountain sitting just above the line. Orange paint at the base of the wall. Questions about permits, fake crack photographs. A pre-drafted HOA letter. Drone pictures, private inspectors. A real estate agent asking whether I was ready to sell. Separate events began connecting themselves, not like a conspiracy in a movie, but like load transferring through a structure. Weight always finds the beams. On Monday, I drove to the county records office. The clerk remembered Sarah. That is one blessing of living near small towns. Memory still has a counter and a chair. She helped me pull the original subdivision documents, the 1952 utility easement, the 1987 hillside drainage amendment, and the construction approvals from when Pine Ridge Valley expanded westward. The documents were not dramatic. Real truth rarely arrives with dramatic music. It arrives as faded ink, stamped margins, survey bearings, and one note from an engineer long retired or long buried. Lower parcel owner retains continuous access and structural protection rights along easement corridor. Upper parcelful improvements must not impede drainage, inspection, or boundary stabilization. Bethany's circular driveway crossed that corridor. Her fountain sat on it. Part of her imported stone patio sat on it. The corner of her outdoor kitchen may have sat on it as well. The concrete wall she wanted destroyed was the most visible marker of a boundary she could not afford anyone to measure honestly. I hired an independent surveyor from Denver, a woman named Patrice Holt, who had no connection to Pine Ridge Valley, Bethany, or anyone who owed Bethany money. Patrice arrived with 2 assistants and equipment that looked like it could find a nickel under a glacier. I asked her to conduct a full boundary and easement verification, quietly and legally, from my property. She studied the old documents and raised one eyebrow. "Who is trying to remove your wall?" she asked. "My neighbor," I said. Patrice looked toward Bethany's house. The fountain flashed in the sun. "Your neighbor should have read the old papers." While Patrice worked, Bethany escalated. Another letter arrived, this one from Morrison, Bradley, and Chase, attorneys at law. It gave me 15 days to remove the concrete wall or face legal action for unreasonable interference with scenic enjoyment, economic harm, and emotional distress caused by hostile architectural obstruction. I read that phrase twice and almost laughed. Hostile architectural obstruction sounded like something Bethany had invented after a glass of expensive wine. The letter referenced a right to unobstructed mountain views. No such right existed in our HOA documents. No such easement appeared in the county records. It was fog dressed as law. I wrote a 1-page response. I acknowledged receipt. I declined removal. I requested that all future communications include specific bylaw sections, permit numbers, and statutory authority. I copied my own attorney, a quiet land use lawyer named Marion Voss, whom I had met years earlier during a highway retaining wall dispute. Marion had the gentle voice of a librarian and the litigation instincts of a chess player. When I sent her the documents, she called me within an hour. "Ethan," she said, "your neighbor is either careless, desperate, or both." "I vote both," I said. Marion did not laugh. "Then do not meet with her alone again, and do not tell her what you found, not yet. There is a special kind of patience required when you know the other person is walking toward a hole, and you must not warn them too soon." Bethany believed my silence meant fear. She mistook my routine for surrender. Every morning, I walked the garden, checked the irrigation, brushed fallen leaves from Sarah's bench, and made notes. Bethany's people kept making mistakes. A maintenance worker in an HOA vest stepped onto my property and photographed the wall footings. A courier delivered a proposed settlement agreement that offered to buy a strip of my land for $1 in exchange for my agreement to replace the concrete wall with decorative fencing. Someone placed a bright red sticker on my trash bin, reading "Pending Enforcement." The waste company had never seen such a sticker. Then came the small hole. It appeared near the south end of the concrete wall, just above grade, no wider than my little finger, and clean around the edge. A test bore. Someone had drilled into the concrete, probably to measure thickness or collect dust, maybe hoping to prove the wall lacked reinforcement. They chose the wrong section. That wall had more steel in it than some small bridges. My hidden camera caught a man in a gray hoodie kneeling at the base of the wall at 1:46 a.m. The hood covered his face, but the truck parked near Bethany's service entrance carried the logo of a contractor she had used for her patio. I sent the video to Marion and Patrice. I did not send it to Bethany. Letting her believe she was unseen had become useful. The second HOA meeting was larger. Bethany had invited what she called affected residents, a building consultant, 2 attorneys, and a man she introduced as a community safety specialist. The meeting was again in her living room. This time there were folders on every chair and printed agendas with my name in bold. The title read, "Caldwell Wall Resolution and Enforcement Pathway." I sat in the back with my notebook. Daniel sat near the window, his face pale. Agnes avoided me completely. Bethany began with emotion. She said Pine Ridge Valley was built on openness. She said walls sent the wrong message. She said concrete belonged in cities, not in a mountain community of shared values. Then she turned toward me with an expression that almost resembled sadness. "Ethan has suffered a terrible personal loss," she said, "and while we honor that, Grief cannot be allowed to harden into a structure that punishes every neighbor around him. That was the closest I came to losing my temper. Not because she attacked the wall, but because she used Sarah as a prop in a room full of people who had no idea how Sarah laughed, how she planted tomatoes too early, how she left notes in my lunchbox the first year I commuted to Denver, how she once made me dance in the kitchen during a thunderstorm because she said engineers needed to respect forces they could not calculate. I closed my notebook, then I opened it again. Facts prefer quiet. The consultant presented the doctored crack photos. He claimed the wall posed a possible future failure risk. Patrice Holt, whom I had invited as my guest but not introduced, listened without expression. The consultant said the word possible 9 times in 7 minutes. He used phrases like visual liability, community exposure, and prudent removal. When he finished, Bethany asked the board to authorize legal action if I did not sign a removal agreement within 10 days. Daniel stood up before the vote. His hands shook, but his voice held. "I need the record to show that I signed my complaint under pressure," he said. "I do not believe Mr. Caldwell's wall is unsafe. I did not write the statement attributed to me." The room became very still. Bethany's face changed for less than a second. It was enough. The smile fell away, and something sharp looked out. Then she recovered. She said Daniel was confused. She said financial stress could affect judgment. She said this was exactly why personal issues should not derail community governance. That was when Agnes began to cry. Not loudly. Just 2 tears and a handkerchief pressed to her mouth. I realized Bethany's structure was carrying too much load. A few beams were beginning to crack. Marion advised me to wait for Patrice's final report before making any public move. Waiting was not hard. I had waited through hospital hallways, waited for test results, waited for Sarah's breathing to ease. Waiting for Bethany to overplay her hand was easy by comparison. She did not disappoint. On the 9th day after the meeting, Bethany sent a notice announcing a community inspection and compliance review at my property line. The notice claimed authority under HOA emergency powers. It said county officials had been invited. It said failure to cooperate would be treated as admission of noncompliance. She scheduled it for Saturday at 11, a time chosen, I think, because she wanted an audience. By then, she had convinced herself that public pressure would do what legal threats had not. I made 3 phone calls, one to Marion, one to Patrice, one to the county building department, where I requested that any inspector attending bring the original permit file. Then I trimmed the roses, cleaned Sarah's bench, and placed a new bag of coffee beans on the counter for Saturday morning. The night before the inspection, Bethany tried one last quiet trick. A message appeared on the community Facebook group from an account created that day. It claimed to be from a concerned structural engineer who had reviewed photos of my wall and believed immediate removal was necessary to prevent collapse. The post included phrases copied from the consultant's report. It also included one technical term used incorrectly in a way no structural engineer would use it. I took screenshots. Within 20 minutes, Marion's investigator traced the profile photo to a stock image site. Within an hour, the post disappeared. Screenshots do not disappear. Saturday came cold and bright. Mountain weather has a way of making every edge honest. The sky was hard blue. Snow still lingered in shaded pockets under the pines. Bethany's driveway filled with cars before 10:30, HOA members, neighbors, 2 attorneys, the consultant, a county inspector, and several people I recognized as real estate agents. Bethany had dressed for victory in a cream coat and dark boots. She stood near the concrete wall with a folder tucked under her arm, looking toward my house as if waiting for me to come out smaller than I was. I came out with Marion on one side and Patrice on the other. Behind us walked Mr. Alvarez from the county building department, carrying a rolled set of old permit drawings. Bethany's smile flickered when she saw Patrice's survey equipment. "This is not necessary," Bethany said. "Today is about visual compliance, not a full legal circus." "Good," Marion replied pleasantly. "Then the facts should take very little time." We gathered at the base of the concrete wall. That wall had never looked more plain or more beautiful to me. It stood in the morning light with the quiet dignity of something designed to do its job. No cracks, No lean, no apology. Bethany addressed the group first, naturally. She spoke about community values, mountain vistas, economic harm, and the burden one homeowner could place on everyone else. She pointed to the wall and said it was a symbol of selfishness. She said it blocked the future of Pine Ridge Valley. When she finished, Marion asked Mr. Alvarez to confirm the wall permit. He unrolled the drawings on a folding table Daniel had brought over without being asked. He stated that the wall had been permitted as a reinforced boundary and drainage protection structure, inspected at footing, reinforcement, and final stages, and closed in good standing. The consultant shifted his weight. Bethany said permits from years ago did not address current community impact. Then Patrice opened her survey report. She began with the original 1952 utility easement. She explained the bearings, the drainage corridor, and the lower parcel owner's retained rights. She spoke simply enough that everyone could follow, but precisely enough that no attorney could pretend not to. She placed markers along the line. One by one, the bright flags told the story Bethany had spent months trying to bury. The concrete wall sat entirely on my property and aligned with the lawful boundary protection corridor. Bethany's driveway crossed the easement. Her fountain sat within it. The edge of her stone patio sat within it. The outdoor kitchen was close enough to require additional verification, which is a polite surveying way of saying someone may have built something expensiver where they should have read twice and poured concrete once. The crowd's attention moved from my wall to Bethany's house. Bethany laughed once. It was a small, dry sound. "That is absurd," she said. "We have HOA maps. We have current plats." Patrice handed Marion a copy of the map Bethany had used. Marion held it up. "This map omits the 1952 easement and shifts the visual boundary line by approximately 11 feet in favor of the upper parcel. We would like to know who prepared it." No one answered. Daniel did. "Bethany gave it to us," he said. "She said it came from the county." Mr. Alvarez looked at the map and shook his head. "Not from our office." There are moments when a crowd becomes a single breathing thing. This was one of them. Neighbors who had avoided my eyes now looked directly at Bethany. Agnes whispered, "Oh, Bethany." It sounded less like surprise than exhaustion. Bethany tried to pivot. She said even if the wall was technically legal, it was still ugly. She said Pine Ridge Valley had an obligation to preserve harmony. She said I was weaponizing grief. I heard the words from far away. My eyes were on the south end of the wall, where the little drilled hole sat just above the grade. Marion followed my gaze. "Since we are discussing structural concerns," Marion said, "we should also address unauthorized tampering." She displayed photographs of the orange markings, the disturbed soil, the nighttime drilling, the fake engineer post, the doctored crack photos, and the inspection crew that had attempted to enter my property. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Each image placed weight on the table. Each timestamp tightened the frame. Bethany objected. One of her attorneys whispered in her ear. The consultant suddenly became very interested in his shoes. Then Daniel told the rest. He told the group Bethany had pressured him to sign complaints. He explained the loan. Agnes admitted Bethany had drafted statements for her too. Another neighbor, Mrs. Klein, stepped forward and said Bethany had done something similar to the Henderson family 2 years earlier, when an alleged siding violation led them to sell below market to a company later connected to Bethany's real estate office. A pattern began to emerge in public, and patterns are dangerous to people who rely on each event looking isolated. Bethany said they were all confused. She said I had manipulated them. She said I was a bitter old man hiding behind concrete. That last line hung in the air. I looked at the wall, then at the people gathered beside it, then at Bethany. "You are right about one thing," I said. My voice surprised me with how calm it was. I did hide behind this wall for a while, not from the neighborhood, from losing Sarah. But the wall was never built to hurt anyone. It was built to protect a garden and stabilize a boundary that existed long before your house was a drawing on a sales brochure. You wanted it gone because it made the true line inconvenient. No one spoke. I continued. "You asked me to remove the only structure that proved where the boundary protection corridor sits. You sent letters before you lived here. You used altered maps. You pressured neighbors. You photographed my private garden. You tried to create a safety issue where there was none. And you did all of it because your improvements were built across an easement you did not want measured. Bethany's face had gone pale under her careful makeup. Marion handed her attorney a formal notice. It was not dramatic. Legal documents rarely are. It stated that I intended to enforce my easement rights and required Bethany to either restore the corridor to compliance or enter a paid access and maintenance agreement. The amount was fair, calculated by land use value, drainage maintenance burden, and the cost of preserving inspection access. It was not designed to ruin her. It was designed to make reality more expensive than bullying. Bethany refused to take the notice, so her attorney took it for her. The county inspector asked the consultant for the source files of the crack photographs. The consultant said he would have to check. Marion asked him to preserve all records. Patrice packed her equipment with the satisfied efficiency of someone whose measurements had spoken clearly. Neighbors began murmuring in small groups. The real estate agents left first. That told me plenty. I thought the morning was over. Bethany decided otherwise. She stepped toward the wall, placed one hand against the concrete, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This thing will come down. I do not care what paper you find." The wall did not answer. Concrete has more dignity than that. Within a week, the HOA board suspended enforcement pending legal review. Within 2 weeks, Bethany resigned as president, though her resignation letter blamed harassment, misunderstanding, and the emotional strain of serving a community resistant to progress. Within a month, a state real estate investigator contacted Daniel, Agnes, Mrs. Klein, the Henderson family, and me. Bethany's altered map became one thread in a much larger sweater. Pulling it revealed referral fees, shell companies, pressured listings, and a habit of creating problems that made certain properties easier to acquire. I did not celebrate. Celebration felt too loud for what had happened. I felt relief, and relief is quieter. I sat in Sarah's garden on the first warm morning after the board changed hands. The roses had survived the noise, the lights, the drone, the lies, and my distraction. New leaves were opening along the canes. The concrete wall held the morning sun. For the first time in months, the only sound was wind moving through pine needles and the faint bell of Sarah's chimes. The new HOA board asked if I wanted a public apology. I said no at first. Then Mrs. Klein told me the apology was not just for me. It was for everyone who had been made to feel alone. So we held a small neighborhood meeting at the clubhouse, the one Bethany had avoided because it did not give her a staircase to stand on. Daniel read a statement acknowledging the false complaints. Agnes apologized for letting fear become a vote. The new board revoked the visual obstruction notice and adopted a rule requiring named complaints, source documentation, and conflict of interest disclosures before enforcement actions could begin. Bethany's house went quiet. The fountain stopped running. Contractors came and removed part of the stone patio. Later, after negotiations I did not attend in person, a property management company took over the house and signed a maintenance access agreement for the easement. The monthly payments did not feel like revenge. They felt like a receipt for reality. I used the first payment to restore the outside face of the concrete wall, not because Bethany had called it ugly, because Sarah would have said even useful things deserved a little grace. I hired Daniel, after his loan was refinanced away from Bethany's influence, to plant climbing hydrangea and native vines along the public-facing side. We added a narrow strip of wildflowers at the base, the kind that could handle poor soil and mountain weather. By late summer, the wall no longer looked like a hard, gray line. It looked like something the earth had decided to keep. People still talked about the concrete wall. Stories grow in mountain towns the way moss grows on north-facing stone. Some said I had known about the easement from the beginning and waited for Bethany to trap herself. That was not true. Some said the wall had secret sensors, hidden steel plates, and military-grade foundations. That was mostly not true. Some said Sarah had saved me by insisting we keep every old document in the filing cabinet. That one was true enough for me. A letter arrived from Bethany 6 months after the Saturday at the wall. It was short. It did not apologize directly. People like Bethany often circle apology like a hawk circling a field, never quite landing. She wrote that mistakes had been made. She wrote that the situation had become unnecessarily adversarial. She wrote that she hoped I would consider reducing the easement fees if circumstances changed. I placed the letter in the file behind the first HOA notice dated before she moved in. The file had grown thick by then. I labeled the folder concrete wall matter and slid it into the cabinet beside Sarah's garden plans. That evening I sat on the bench behind the wall and told Sarah the whole story out loud. I had spoken to her often after she passed, but mostly in fragments. Weather reports, garden updates, complaints about the dishwasher. This time I told it from the beginning. Bethany on the porch, the orange marks, the 11-minute camera gap, Daniel's confession, the old survey, the Saturday crowd. The way the wall stood there while people finally saw what had been hidden in plain sight. When I finished, a breeze moved through the roses and set her wind chimes ringing. I am not a mystical man. I believe in load paths, soil compaction, drainage, and well-kept records. But I also believe a man can receive comfort without needing to explain its engineering. 1 year later, Pine Ridge Valley looked much the same from the road. The mountains still rose blue in the distance. The pines still leaned into winter. Houses still needed paint. Driveways still cracked. Neighbors still argued about snowplow timing and trash pickup. But something under the surface had changed. People asked for documents before believing accusations. HOA meetings moved back to the clubhouse. Daniel joined the board and insisted every enforcement discussion begin with the words, "What proof do we have?" Agnes started bringing cookies to meetings, homemade and uneven, which made them better than anything Bethany had ever delivered in a basket. The Henderson family came back one afternoon. They had not bought their old house again. Too much had happened for that, but they wanted to see the wall. Mr. Henderson stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the concrete half covered in vines. He said Bethany had made them feel foolish, then trapped, then ashamed for being trapped. His wife touched one of Sarah's roses and said, "I wish someone had had a wall like this back then." I understood what she meant. Not concrete, a line, a place where manipulation stopped. The story eventually reached a local newspaper, though not in the wild way Bethany would have feared. The headline called it a dispute over a concrete fence that exposed flaws in an HOA. The article was fair. It mentioned my career in structural engineering, Sarah's garden, the altered map, and the reforms that followed. It did not make me a hero, which I appreciated. Heroes are usually people other people simplify. I was an old man who had kept records, asked questions, and refused to remove a wall that had every right to stand. A few readers wrote letters. One man in Arizona said his HOA had pressured him over a wheelchair ramp. A widow in Oregon wrote that she had been fined for a garden her husband planted before he passed. A retired teacher in North Carolina sent a photograph of a fence she had rebuilt after a neighbor tried to claim 3 feet of her yard. I answered every letter I could. My advice was always the same. Stay calm, keep records, read the old documents. Do not confuse a loud voice with authority. On the 2nd anniversary of Sarah's passing, the neighbors asked whether they could help with the garden. I nearly said no. The garden had been mine because grief had made me private. But grief changes shape when you let good people near it. Daniel brought mulch, Agnes brought lemonade. Mrs. Klein brought 2 rose bushes in Sarah's favorite shade of yellow. Even Mr. Alvarez from the county came by after work with a pair of gloves and a joke about finally inspecting something pleasant. We spent the afternoon planting along the inside of the concrete wall, not to hide it, to soften it. By sunset, the wall cast a long shadow across the garden, and that shadow no longer felt like loneliness. Children from 2 houses down chased each other near the gate, while their parents pretended not to watch every step. The new HOA president, a retired school principal named Linda Carver, asked if the community could establish a small annual fund for homeowners facing unfair enforcement. I said the easement payments could seed it. Sarah would have liked that. She had always believed any tool worth owning should be useful to more than one person. There was one more formal hearing before the matter fully settled. And in some ways that quiet county room taught the neighborhood more than the Saturday spectacle at the wall. It took place on a rainy Tuesday in a building with old carpet, humming fluorescent lights, and framed photographs of commissioners who looked as if they had been waiting decades for people to stop arguing about property lines. Bethany did not attend in person. Her attorney appeared with a stack of papers and the careful expression of a man trying to close a door without admitting there had ever been a fire behind it. Marion sat beside me. Patrice sat behind us with her survey binder. Daniel and Agnes came too, not because they had to, but because they said they wanted to hear the record corrected out loud. The hearing officer was a gray-haired woman named Mrs. Ellison, who had the patient face of someone who had listened to every kind of neighbor dispute and had lost all interest in drama. She asked simple questions. Was the wall permitted? Yes. Was the easement recorded? Yes. Did the upper parcel improvements cross the corridor? Yes. Did the HOA have authority to erase an old utility and drainage right through a community map? No. Did any enforceable right to an unobstructed view exist in the recorded documents? No. Each answer landed softly, but together they closed the matter more firmly than any shouting could have. Mrs. Ellison ordered the county record updated with Patrice's corrected exhibit and referred the altered map issue for administrative review. Her final sentence was the one people remembered. Aesthetic preference is not a property right. After the hearing, Daniel stood under the courthouse awning with rain dripping from the edge of his cap. He told me he had spent months thinking he was weak. I told him most people do not know how much pressure they can take until someone deliberately applies it in private. Bethany had never relied on one large threat. She relied on small ones, spaced carefully enough that each person felt foolish describing them. A delayed referral, a loan reminder, a comment about a tax problem, a hint that a complaint could become public. That was her method. She made people feel isolated, then sold them obedience as relief. That conversation became part of the workshop later. Linda asked me to explain why Bethany had succeeded for as long as she did, and I told the room it was because she understood embarrassment. People will talk about a storm, a broken pipe, a sick dog, or a bad roof. They are slower to talk about being manipulated. They wonder whether they should have known better. They wonder whether others will blame them. Bethany built her little kingdom in that silence. The cure was not courage in the movie sense. The cure was neighbors comparing notes before shame could harden into secrecy. Mrs. Klein started the first comparison notebook. It was a plain spiral-bound notebook kept in a drawer at the clubhouse office. Anyone who received an enforcement notice could log the date, the bylaw cited, the person who sent it, and whether the complaint was named or anonymous. No accusations, no gossip, just a record. Within 3 months, the notebook showed something useful. Most complaints were ordinary and easily solved. Trash cans left too long, a trailer parked over a weekend, paint colors submitted late. But now everyone could tell the difference between a rule and a pressure tactic. Sunlight, I learned, does not have to be bright to work. Sometimes it just has to be steady. I also changed a few things about my own habits. Before Bethany, I had treated privacy as the same thing as peace. Afterward, I understood they were cousins, not twins. Once a month, I opened Sarah's garden to the neighborhood for 1 hour on Sunday afternoon. People walked quietly, because even children can sense when a place asks for gentleness. I did not make speeches. I did not tell the story unless someone asked. Most people came to see the roses, but they left understanding the wall differently. From outside, concrete looked like refusal. From inside, it looked like shelter. One Sunday, Agnes stood beside Sarah's bench for a long time. She told me she had let Bethany use fear because fear felt easier than conflict. Her husband had been gone 8 years. She had worried about liens, legal fees, and the humiliation of having old financial trouble pulled into public. Bethany had never openly threatened her. She had only mentioned things at exactly the right moments. That was enough. Agnes asked if I hated her for voting with Bethany at first. I told her the truth. For a while I had. Then the evidence came in, and hatred became less useful than repair. She nodded, and we stood there in the garden without needing to make the moment prettier than it was. The repair did not happen all at once. Trust is not a switch. It is more like concrete curing, slow strength forming after the pour, invisible until tested. Some neighbors apologized quickly, almost too quickly, wanting the discomfort behind them. Others avoided me for months, not because they still believed Bethany, but because being wrong in public leaves a bruise. I let them take their time. A man who has built bridges knows both sides do not meet in the middle by accident. You need measurements, supports, and patience, especially patience. The fund started small, a few $1,000s. Then neighbors added to it. Then a local law clinic offered workshops on property records and HOA rights. Once a quarter, people gathered at the clubhouse to learn how to read plats, easements, bylaws, and enforcement notices. I gave the first presentation because Linda insisted no one could explain concrete, paperwork, and stubbornness with more practical experience. I stood at the front of the room with Mercer's old survey projected behind me and told them the truth. Most property problems are not solved by anger. They are solved by patience, clarity, and refusing to let someone else define the facts for you. Afterward, a young couple approached me. They had just bought a starter home near the lower meadow and were nervous about every rule. The husband asked if the neighborhood was always this complicated. I looked out the clubhouse window toward the ridge, where evening light turned the mountains purple. Every place is complicated, I said. The question is whether people use the rules to protect each other or to control each other. Bethany sold what remained of her interests in Pine Ridge Valley the following spring. I did not see her leave. Daniel did. He said the white SUV was gone before dawn and that she had a moving truck loaded with outdoor furniture, boxed mirrors, and the kind of large abstract paintings people buy when they are decorating a house for photographs instead of living. I wished her no harm. That surprised me a little. For months I had imagined what justice might feel like, and when it finally came, it did not feel sharp. It felt like a gate closing gently. Her former house became a rental for families visiting the mountains. The property management company kept the fountain turned off and planted native grasses where the illegal patio had been removed. The easement corridor stayed clear. Guests sometimes asked about the concrete wall. The company placed a small note in the welcome binder, explaining that the wall was a permitted boundary and drainage structure protecting a private memorial garden. No drama, no names, just facts. I respected that. One autumn morning, I found a little girl standing with her father near the public side of the wall, looking at the vines. She asked why someone would build a wall if they liked flowers. Her father looked embarrassed and started to apologize, but I told him it was all right. I knelt as much as my knees allowed and told her some flowers need protection from wind and deer and careless feet. She thought about that. Then she said, "But the flowers are growing on the wall too." I told her that was the best part. She was right. The wall had become something more than I built. The concrete still held its line. The steel still carried tension where it needed to. The footing still reached below frost depth. But life had found the surface. Vines climbed. Bees worked the flowers at the base. Rain darkened the face in slow patterns. Snow rested on the cap in winter like a clean white ribbon. What Bethany had called ugly became, with time and care, exactly what Sarah would have made of it. Useful, stubborn, and unexpectedly beautiful. I still keep the first letter. I keep the fake crack photos. I keep the orange mark photographs, the camera logs, the altered map, the anonymous warning, the drill hole report, Patrice's survey, Marion's notice, and the final HOA apology. Not because I enjoy looking at them, because memory without records can be bent by people who speak confidently enough. Paper has weight. Photographs have weight. Measurements have weight. A quiet person with proof is not as alone as he thinks. Sometimes visitors ask whether I would build the wall again if I knew all the trouble it would bring. I tell them, yes, but I would plant the vines sooner. That usually makes them smile, though I mean it seriously. Strength without grace can become its own kind of loneliness. Grace without strength can be trampled. Sarah understood that better than I did. Maybe the wall took me a few years to learn it. On clear mornings, I still sit on her bench with coffee while the sun comes over the ridge. The concrete wall warms slowly. The roses open when they are ready, never when I ask. Wind moves over the top of the wall and drops into the garden softer than it used to. From Bethany's old house, guests can see the mountains just fine. They can also see the line where the easement runs, the strip of open ground left clear because documents written in 1952 still matter, because a widow's garden still matters, because an old man who seems quiet may have spent a lifetime learning how to make things stand. The lesson was never that concrete beats cruelty. Concrete is only material. The lesson was that boundaries matter, especially when someone with a polished smile tells you they are old-fashioned, inconvenient, or selfish. Some boundaries protect land. Some protect memory. Some protect a community from the kind of person who uses rules as a ladder and neighbors as steps. And sometimes, when a bully demands that you tear down what you built, the answer is not to shout back. Sometimes the answer is to check the footings, read the old papers, invite witnesses, and let the wall stand there in the morning light, telling the truth without raising its voice.